My name is Carla Simonini, and I'm Italian-American on both sides of my family. On my father's side, the last name Simonini is Tuscan, and my father is very proud of his Tuscan roots, has done a lot of research, and we can trace that family back all the way to the Middle Ages in Italy. The Simonini family was an early group of immigrants. They came over in the 1870s, so they have a long-time presence in the United States. All of my grandparents were actually born in the United States, so I've never had any direct contact with someone who actually experienced the immigration process itself. I can tell you that there were different attitudes on both sides of the family. The Tuscan side of the family was a little more proud. They were better off than many of the other Italian Americans. They established themselves earlier, they set up businesses, and they were a little better off than the other side of the family. On my mother's side, we have a family branch that comes back to Lazio e Catania. My great-grandfather on my mother's side came over as a stone cutter. He was on a contract, a 7-year work contract. He went over to the quarries in Maine and worked there. So they had to work for a period of 7 years to work off the cost of the travel there. And they never intended to stay in the United States, which was typical of that generation. He had intended to work and earn money and then go back to Italy. The story goes that he got called back to Italy because his parents were sick. He went back over. It was World War I. He was still an Italian citizen, so he was conscripted and forced to serve in the Italian army. And then the story differentiates. I think he probably caught the Spanish flu or tuberculosis or something like that. Died in Italy, leaving my great-grandmother a widow in the United States with 8 children. And that's how she ended up staying there. We don't know how they ended up from Maine back into Rhode Island, but that's where my family is from, Rhode Island in the United States. I got into Italian-American studies pretty much by accident. I went into a PhD program in Italian studies, predominantly Italian literary studies, at Brown University. And at a certain point, I found myself surrounded by Italians from Italy who were studying for the American PhD. And I was a little intimidated. I felt like they had a much vaster cultural background than I had. And I enjoyed my studies. But at a certain point, I began to investigate myself more, and I found out about this growing field of Italian-American studies. I asked my dissertation advisor if I could do a dissertation that was interdisciplinary and combined literary studies in Italian with American literature and a lot of background with immigration studies, ethnic studies, etc. And he approved the dissertation. I reached out to Fred Gardefei, who was one of the leading scholars in the area. Even though I wasn't one of his students, he agreed to be a reader for me. And that's how I completed my dissertation. My dissertation looked at the Italian-American identity across the generations, starting in the late 19th century, and I tracked novels all the way into the 1980s and 1990s. After I finished my PhD, I got a tenure-track job as an Italian professor, and I teach all levels of Italian language and culture, and I teach literature and civilization courses. But one of the things that set me apart for this particular job is that the university was very supportive of the idea that I had a background with Italian-American studies, and they had a rich Italian-American community around the university, and they encouraged me to develop courses and a curricula in that area. So I've authored courses in Italian-American literature and Italian-American identity through the English department and the American Studies department. Those courses were really well attended. They were filled, and I got very good reception and evaluations from the students. So that's what I've been doing since I've been there. I still am responsible for the Italian curriculum, but I also do these other courses, and that has led very recently to a campaign to to create a center for Italian and Italian American Studies at our university, which we have just launched, and I'm really looking forward to that. That would create a directorship for it, center for seminars, colloquia, workshops. It'll make sure that there's a dedicated position at the university, not just to maintain Italian studies, but to always include the study of Italian American culture, history in the curriculum. And that's the path I followed. So I started out exploring my own roots, ended up looking at traditional Italian culture, and then found my way back to my own Italian immigrant experience and found ways to study it and honor it critically and scholarly. I think the future of Italian American Studies in the United States is promising, holds a lot of promise. There are a number of universities that already have endowed professorships or centers for the critical study of the Italian American experience. At my own university, we've just started a fundraising campaign for a Center for Italian and Italian American Studies that would include a directorship, which would mean that the university would promise, make a commitment into the future that there would always be a dedicated professor that would not only continue with the Italian language program, the Italian culture program, but also would include coursework in Italian American Studies. The center would also be a place where people could donate their own personal artifacts. We maintain an archive there. We have an Italian American newspaper from the beginning of the century that we maintain there. These are important, and I think the generation that no longer has direct contact with the immigration experience of the early 20th century is anxious to make sure that there's a place where they can look at their own history critically and also look at it in terms of the particular immigration experience. We have a lot of focus in the United States on the generalities of the immigration experience, but that's not to lose sight of what's specific about each one. And that's what Italian American Studies does. The collaboration with the CLIA program is essential. I think for the first time ever, we have an opportunity to create connections on the other side of the ocean and look at the experience more holistically, not only as an immigration movement, but as an emigration movement, and also moving into the forward as part of the diasporic experience of Italian Americans. We still have an uptick of Italians coming to the United States, but for different reasons than they did at the beginning of the century.